How would the disciples know where to prepare their final meal with Jesus? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Luke on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Luke 22. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 13. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Luke chapter 22, beginning at verse 1. Now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. Then Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. So he went his way and conferred with chief priests and captains, how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. So he promised and sought opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of the multitude. Then came the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover must be killed. And he sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat. So they said to him, Where do you want us to prepare? And he said to them, Behold, when you have entered the city, a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house which he enters. Then you shall say to the master of the house, The teacher says to you, Where is the guest room, where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? Then he will show you a large furnished upper room. There make ready. So they went and found it just as he said to them, and they prepared the Passover. With the conclusion of Luke 21, we have now finished the events of Tuesday before Jesus' crucifixion and concluded Jesus' public ministry. Coming to chapter 22, Luke gives us the time of year we're in, which is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is called the Passover. From our studies of Exodus 12 and 13, we know that these two feasts were held back to back. They would start on the 14th day of Nisan and would go until the 21st day of Nisan, making the whole festival 8 days long. Note here that Luke refers to the Feast of Unleavened Bread as being synonymous with the Passover, which means that these terms can be and were used interchangeably. Noticing this is important for later on in this chapter and the next chapter as it concerns the timing of Jesus' death. Verses 1 to 6 probably take place on Wednesday, although Thursday is not precluded either. The chief priests and scribes were looking for a way to kill Jesus, but they feared the people, so whatever their plan was, it would have to be done away from the people. But how would this be accomplished? For Jesus was never alone away from the crowds. Answer Judas Iscariot. Luke said that Satan entered Judas, and by this I don't believe Luke is saying that Judas was possessed by Satan, but that Satan tempted Judas with Judas's weakness, money. Judas knew that the scribes and chief priests were looking to kill Jesus, for he had seen their interactions earlier in the week. He also had seen Jesus escape death on numerous occasions. So it was easy for Satan to tempt Judas to betray Jesus for money. Judas most likely thought that Jesus would escape, he would be richer, and nobody would know. Alas, from the rest of the story, we know that that is not how it went down. So with this thought in mind, Judas conferred with the chief priests. They agreed upon a sum of money, which Matthew told us was 30 pieces of silver, and Judas would guide them to Jesus when he was away from the crowds, which Luke told us at the end of chapter 1 was on the Mount of Olives. All Judas had to do now was wait. Coming out of verse 7, again, like it was with Matthew and Mark, Luke makes it appear as if the final meal that Jesus ate with the disciples was the Passover meal, which would take place at the end of the 14th day of Nisan, making his death occur on the 15th day of Nisan. John, however, precludes such an interpretation, as does many of the types and antitypes relationships between Jesus being the Passover and the first fruits that the New Testament speaks of. Is there thus a contradiction between Matthew, Mark, and Luke with the book of John? No, if we but remember that the Feast of Unleavened Bread and Passover are used synonymously. All Luke is saying here is that the feast was about to begin. Recall from Exodus 13 verse 7 that before the feast, leaven was to be removed from the people's houses. This is the day that Luke is referring to. The meal that Jesus ate with the disciples would occur after sunset on the 14th day of Nisan, but since Jewish days begin at sunset, the meal was not the Passover meal, but a common meal that occurred on the night before the Passover. If this is true, why does Luke say that this was the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover must be killed? And then why does Jesus ask his disciples to go and prepare the Passover for us? Well, to the first question, which deals with when the Passover must be killed, Luke again is making a general statement. He is saying this is the time when the Passover lamb must be killed. He didn't say that it occurred that afternoon. He just is giving us a general time period. As to the second question about Jesus asking his disciples to go and prepare the Passover, again, Passover can refer to the whole 8-day festival, which began on the 14th day of Nisan. The lamb would be eaten at the end of that day at twilight, but the Passover began at the beginning of that day. Notice, later on in the chapter, no lamb is going to be mentioned as any part of that meal. Unleavened bread and fruit of the vine are, but the lamb is not. That would tell us that the final meal Jesus had with his disciples was a different meal, and not the Passover meal. Jesus, though, did want to eat one final meal with his disciples alone, so he needed a place to do that at. How were the disciples to know where that place was? Well, they would go to Jerusalem, and there they would meet a man carrying a pitcher of water. They were to follow that man to his house and ask him where his guest room was. He would show them the guest room, and it would be there where the disciples were to make ready. How did Jesus know these things? He is God. He is all-knowing and can bring about history to accomplish his will. And when the disciples did what Jesus asked, it happened just as he said. We'll continue with this, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Luke chapter 22, verses 14 to 23, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.